Today we're going to be building a map using React Leaflet. As you can see, we have a world map and each country is a different randomly generated color. Every time I click the refresh button, you'll see that each country gets a different randomly generated shade of red. We even have zoom functionality built right in. It requires very little code and just works. As you can see, I can zoom out, I can zoom in. Once zoomed in, I can also pan across the map. This map also responds to touch events, so it works on your mobile device. Other functionality that we'll be adding is the ability to click on a country, display a tooltip, and show the country's name. We'll even allow the user to go ahead and select a different color, click on a country, and change the color. As you can see, I can paint my map with different colors. This is a little bit of fun functionality that we'll be building throughout this video. Before we get started, if you enjoy my videos, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. To build a map like this, we're going to be using Leaflet. Leaflet is a JavaScript library used to build maps. This is the Leaflet webpage over here at leaflet-js.com. As you can see, it has tutorials, documents, how to download, how to use plugins. A lot of information is provided over here. Now, we could use this in our React application, but it wouldn't be that easy. Lucky for us, there's a React version of Leaflet JavaScript library, and it's called React Leaflet. So from here, we can find documentation. So if I go over here to React Leaflet, it's just like the Leaflet site. We got documentation, how to use it, and what this provides us. Let's take a look at that relationship between Leaflet and React Leaflet. So in this next part over here, I have a diagram. Here we have a library called Leaflet, a JavaScript library. On top of Leaflet, we have a library called React Leaflet. As you can see, React Leaflet is built on top of the Leaflet library. React Leaflet provides you with components for all your Leaflet functionality. To further illustrate this, there's an arrow that we can draw between these boxes. Let's go ahead and move this up over here and move this over here down. Moving that down right there. So as we can see, there's an arrow from React Leaflet to Leaflet JavaScript. That means there's a dependency from React Leaflet to Leaflet JavaScript library. So React Leaflet is built on top of the Leaflet library, providing us with those components that we spoke of. And then our application in turn is going to depend on and use React Leaflet. React Leaflet, without our knowing, creates an abstraction over the Leaflet JavaScript library to provide us with components. Now, all of these layers here are layers of abstraction. For now, it's good to know that the concept of abstraction provides you with easier to use code. For example, you can have abstraction over using a web API by providing a library that does all that boilerplate code for you. In order to go ahead and build this map over here, we're going to be using something called a GeoJSON file. This is basically a JavaScript file, a JSON file, that's going to describe our map. It's going to have an array of every single country and how to draw that country and then what properties are included. For example, in our map over here, one of the properties that we include for every single country over here is the name. So that when you click on that country, we have the name of that country. So going back over here, there's a Wikipedia article that I have open. And yes, it explains that GeoJSON is an open standard designed for representing simple geographical features along with their non-spatial attributes. It is based on JSON format. So right there, it explains we have geographical feature along with non-spatial attributes. So looking over here, here's an example of a file. This JSON file over here has a type that says it's a feature collection. And then the part that we're interested in is over here. It's the features. So these features over here is an array. Each feature is a country. So this over here is a country for us. Whatever country this over here would be. It has coordinates, which is how it gets drawn on the screen. Now, we don't need to worry about how it gets drawn, but you can see this example over here with these coordinates is much more complex. There are several different points and areas where it draws it, and that's the information that React Leaflet is going to take in and use to draw the shape of a country. So any one of these countries and their shapes it's going to use to draw that. And that's what those coordinates represent, where it goes on the screen, what the shape looks like, and how it gets drawn. But we don't have to worry about that. React will take care of that for us. And then the non-spatial properties that refer to, right over here, properties. We can have any properties we want with any names we want. So for example, we have a country name. We could have population data. We could have the color of the country, or in our example, the opacity level that we're setting to make it red or not, or a lighter red. And that's basically what a GeoJSON file is, and we'll be using one of these in our program. Let's get to coding. So opening up your terminal, your command prompt, let's go ahead and do npx create React app, and let's just call our application leaflet map. Now that we've created the application, let's go ahead and open it up. Over here, type in code, leaflet, map. So we're just typing in the code and the name of the directory that we want Visual Studio Code to open it up in. And here we are. Let's test our application out to make sure that we're in a good state. So now that we got our application over here, let's open up terminal. You can do that by holding Control and then hitting the tilde key beside the number 1, and that'll open up your terminal. Or you can go up into the menu, and up in the menu over here, you'll see terminal and new terminal. Once you have your terminal open, it'll open up over here down here in the bottom, and we can type npm start. Npm start will kick our application up, open our development server, and then load the application. So here we are. We have a blank application, we got the default logo, and we are in a known good state, and we can start coding. Let's go back over to our Visual Studio. Within Visual Studio Code over here, we still have our terminal, and we can see our application running. It's running on port 3000. Let's go add another terminal. So click on the plus button over here. That'll add another terminal. For me on Mac, it's ZSH. For you on Windows, it could be PowerShell or CMD. So now that we're over here, let's go add the dependencies that we require for this application. We'll do npm install. And what we're going to be installing is Leaflet and React Leaflet. Go ahead and install those dependencies. There we are. Now that we have our dependencies working, we can go back to our application over here, and we can see that everything is still running as it should. Click refresh and everything is good. So those dependencies are installed. We can see them in our package.json. We have React Leaflet over here, and then Leaflet just above over there. So dependencies are installed. Let's switch our terminal back over here, back to Node, so that we can see if we have any compilation errors while we're developing our application. We'll go ahead and create a new folder inside of src, and we're going to call that folder components. So over there, components. Inside of components, we're going to go ahead and create a new file. Call that mymap.jsx. Inside of mymap.jsx, I'm using my React snippets extension here in Visual Studio Code, so I can basically just do the imports with a tiny little shortcut. And then go ahead and create that class called mymap, once again with that shortcut cc. Once we've created that component over here, we'll just put a div. Inside that div, we'll put an h1, and that div will say, h1 will then say mymap. We'll save that. That'll have no effect on our application because we haven't used this component yet. We'll go to we'll go to app.js. Inside of app.js, let's go ahead and delete all of that HTML. What we're going to be doing, and we'll also delete the logo and the CSS. All we're left with is import React and our function over here. We'll go ahead and import my map from, and we're going to go into the current directory, which means dot, and go into components, and then go into my map. Then inside of the return, we can type my map, close it off like that. Now, if we go back to our page, we have my map on the screen. We can go into my map over here, and we can just go ahead and just add a style real quick to match our template that we had earlier. and we'll say text, align, and we're just gonna center that text. So go back over here, and now we have my map centered on the screen. For the next step, we're gonna go ahead and get GeoJSON data. That GeoJSON data that we're gonna be getting will be coming from datahub.io, and this data that we're gonna be grabbing is a GeoJSON file. What's special about this GeoJSON file is that it contains the ISO country names. Now those are abbreviation for country names, 2 letters and 3 letters. I'll show you what that ISO standard looks like over here. So the ISO standard on this Wikipedia page over here is called ISO 3166-1. What this is an international standard which says that country names will be in either alpha 2, alpha 3, which means 2 characters, 3 characters, or a numeric digit. Essentially what this means is if I'm using this GeoJSON file and it has all the countries using this standard, and I come across some data like crime statistics or whatever for countries, and they display that data using the ISO standard, say for 2 characters or 3 characters for a country name, well, I can associate the data from my file to the data that's in that statistical information that I'm grabbing from another API or database. That basically means that we're using the same country name. So if I had United States as US, and in your crime data for United States, you typed out the name United States, well, when I searched your database for US, I wouldn't find it because you're using United States and I'm using US. But if we're using the same ISO standard for that data, then it makes it a lot easier for me to find the data I'm looking for in your database when I go check it. So this is why I'm using this particular GeoJSON file. I'll be including it in the description for this video, including this GeoJSON link over here. So in order to access this, if you click downloads, it just kind of pops you near the bottom of the file here. What you can do is you can just click on this down arrow over here or on this zip, download that file. And then what you need to do is inside our application over here, we're going to create a new folder. And we're just going to call that data. And that's where we're going to be putting the data for our application. With that being said over here, you're able to reveal in Finder, or I believe in Windows, reveal in Explorer. When you click on that, it's going to open up another window. And then over here, what we can do is we can easily drag and drop our data file into here. What I'll do now is drag that file over here on another screen onto data. And there we go, we have countries.geojson. We'll go back to our application over here, our Visual Studio Code, and now that file's inside of here. As you can see, the GeoJSON file is just like we saw in the Wikipedia article. It's one object, as we can see over here, and that one object contains one property called type, which is the type of GeoJSON object that it is, and this is a feature collection. And then the other property inside here is features, and features is an array. Each item in that array represents a country. And as you can see, there are 3 properties. Well, there's type, which is always going to be feature. There's properties, which is information about the country. So over here, we have the name of the country. I'm not entirely sure why it's called admin, but that is the name of the country there. And then ISO A3, which we just talked about. It's using 3-character country code to represent the country. If we go back to the previous article that we had open over here, ISO 3166, we will see that if we're looking at the country codes over here, like here's the name of the countries, and then here's the alpha A3 code. So we can see all the country codes over there. So once again, if we're communicating with some other API, we're talking the same language. So coming back over here, looking at this GeoJSON object, we also have a geometry, and that's what we're going to be using to draw the object. It's a polygon, it's got coordinates, and that's what it's going to draw on the screen. It's going to draw that shape of your country for you. So going back over here, let's go get that data imported into our application. We've added it here. Now, what I typically do is I take this countries.geojson and I just rename it to countries.json because this will work with our import if we want to use that data. Then go back to my map. So we're in the mymap.jsx and we're going to import that entire JSON object. To start off with, let's call this countries. And we're going to import that from the data directory. So we're in the component directory. We need to first go up to the src directory. So let's do that. We're in the current folder. That's what that means, current folder. And ... will bring us back into the src folder. See, you can see all the files that are in src over here. There's components directory, data directory. Then we jump into the data directory. Inside the data directory, we grab countries.json. So that gives us our countries over here. Now we have our countries object. Well, how do we know that we really have that object? Let's do a quick little test over here. Let's, on component did mount over here, what we can do is we can print console.log, and let's print out the countries onto the screen. Well, not the screen, but onto the console. So there we are, we have our console.log. Let's take a look at that console.log. So over here, 3 dots over here inside your Chrome, if you're using Chrome. Otherwise, if you're using a different browser, typically F12 if you're on Windows to get to the developer tools. Otherwise, go to more tools over here, go to developer tools. And then this is what we just printed on the screen with console.log. And you can see we have all our features, and all our features are available to us. We have the country name, we have the polygons, we have the geometry. So we have that information that we require for our application. Let's put a map on the screen. Step 1, we're going to add that CSS that we require. So over here, we're going to add the leaflet CSS. Now that's coming from the node modules folder. So we're going to go into leaflet. DIST stands for distribution, and then leaflet.css. That's where our CSS will come from for the map. After we've done that, we can go ahead and import. We're going to import map. That's the main component that we want to be using. From where? You guessed it, React Leaflet. We're finally using React Leaflet. Here we go. We have a map. Below that H1, we're going to go ahead and put that map there. Our screen won't change. There won't be anything on it just yet. First thing, let's go add a style to this map. That style that we're going to be adding is a height. Let's just get that in the right place there. Let's go ahead and add a height. So we're going to be using the viewport. The viewport height is the visible part of the screen. So for the visible part of the screen, we're going to use about 80% of it. So we're going to set it to 80 viewport height. That's what VH is. And we'll put that in quotes over there like that. And that's going to set it to the viewport height using about 80% of the screen height. So there we are. We have our CSS and we have a viewport height, and then we have this gray area on the screen. We don't have a map yet, but that's the next step. Once we add the map data and ask it to draw it, 2 items will be required. One will be the zoom. So we're going to put a zoom of 2. We can zoom in and zoom out, but we can control that manually to say what the default value is. And the second item that we're going to have there, let's put that zoom in the correct place in between there and save that. And the other item that we're going to require is a center. So where on the map do we want to center? We could center over a different country or a different area of the map. For that, we use an array, which is like an XY position. So it's got 2 items in it, 20, and we'll put 100. Still, we'll just still have that gray area because we haven't added any data yet. In order to get the data to show, we're now going to add a new component called GeoJSON. This is where the JavaScript file, the JSON file in the data folder comes into play. This is where we're going to say, hey, React Leaflet, go ahead and use this map over here. So let's go ahead and add GeoJSON. GeoJSON has a property called data. The data property will take in a list of features or countries. So over here, we've called this countries. I'm going to rename this actually to map data. And then over here, we can also print out map data. And inside GeoJSON that we've added over here, which I'm going to actually go ahead and make that a self-closing component. We'll go map.data. So map data. And we're going to grab the features collection. Because remember, this has a list of features on it. We're going to say GeoJSON, essentially, here's a list of countries. Draw and display that on the screen. Zoom in to a level of 2. And then center over a position of 20 and 100 on the screen. And this map will take up 80% of the screen. So let's go back over here. And now we have a map. We're zoomed at a level of 2. And we're showing centering over 20 and 100 over here on this position of the map. I can zoom out with the map. I can zoom in with it. Can't click on any of the countries yet, but if I do click, double click, it just zooms in. So far we've added a map. We're using that GeoJSON data and all of these properties to come together to build a map for us that automatically has zoom. Let's style the map. So as you can see, our map has a gray background. The countries are light blue with a blue border. We're going to focus on that gray background. How do we change that color? Well, as you saw earlier, our code over here on the map, we do have a style, but we can't change the color there because the background color is actually coming from a CSS class. Now that CSS class is defined in leaflet.css. To override that, we can simply put a new CSS file that comes after leaflet.css. So what we go over here is we want to import a CSS file, but we don't have one yet. So let's go over here to our components, go to new file, we'll create a mymap.css, and then inside our JSX file, we're going to say in the current folder, go ahead and say mymap.css and import that. Now over here, in order to override that class, we need to know which class it is. Well, the class that we need to override is leaflet-container. And leaflet-container, we want to set the background color. We'll go ahead and set that to the color white, and we have a map now with a white background. If we wanted to, you could go ahead and use a different color, say green. You can get some really interesting effects on your map. The reason we're getting this effect is because there is some transparency set on these borders and on these countries. So the green color seeping through into the country, giving this really unique effect. You could even go ahead and change the background to a really light color blue to simulate the ocean. We've changed the color over here, and let's go back and change that to white. Now that we have a white background over here, we can focus in on the countries and changing the country colors. So let's go ahead and see how we can change these colors. Going back to our mymap.jsx file over here, we're going to be setting some styles, not on the map because the map affects the map itself, but not the individual countries that are being drawn to the screen. To do that, we need to set some styling on the GeoJSON. The GeoJSON object allows us to set a style. Now, we're not going to inline our style like we did over here with the map. This one only has one, so it's not too bad, but we're going to do a few styles. We're going to change the border, the country color, and a few other properties we're going to play with. So to make that code more manageable, we'll create a variable. We'll call it this.country style. And this.country style, if we go ahead and copy that, we'll just define a variable over here. And that variable will be equal to an object. That object will have various properties on it. Oh, and down over here, just a little typo. I added an extra brace right there. So there you go, this.country style. We have it right there and there's no error. Now let's go ahead and play with a few of those properties. So our code is still running, we're in a good state. Let's go play with a few of these colors. Okay, so we have one called fill color. So fill color, let's go ahead and set that to red. The fill color will set the country color. So over here we have the country color. It's not quite a red. It almost looks like red. It's kind of a pink. The reason for this is the level of transparency. If you're fully opaque, that means you're not transparent. Let's play with that as well. So the fill color is red and it's showing up as a pink at the moment. Well, the reason for that is the fill opacity. So over here, we're going to set that to 1. And I'll explain how that works. Over here, you're going to see now the countries are fully red. They're not transparent at all. Map looks kind of interesting with those blue borders, but it's a red color right now. And that red color is fully transparent. Now, what number can I put here? Could I put 100? I mean, that would still make it look really red, but it doesn't change it. The number stays the same. Well, that's because the fill opacity over here is a number between 0 and 1. Well, what numbers are between 0 and 1? Well, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. You get the idea. So when you're 1, you're fully opaque. You're not transparent. If we change the number to 0.1 and we save that and let the screen refresh, we'll see that it's a really, really light shade of red. If we put the number 1 over here, then we're solid, as we saw earlier. But if we put the number 0.5, we're something in between red and the color that's the background currently, which is white. So those are fun numbers you can play with. And then for our example, we can just leave that as 1 over there. And that would be our map over here. Not as nice looking. So we need to change those border colors. It's really polarizing with this blue over here. So to change the border color, we can set the color. Let's set the color to black and see how that looks. Much nicer. With the color black now, this looks like a much more appropriate map. It looks way nicer. It's got these really nice borders. How about, what if we wanted to make these lines thicker between those borders there? Well, we could play with something called weight, and we could set the weight to 2 and see what happens. Oh, so those lines are thicker. That means the weight that was already set earlier was actually a larger number, and now we've made these lines thinner compared to before. For fun, we could also play with something called a dash array, and we can set the dash array to a number as well. If we set the dash array to 1, it looks pretty normal. If you set the dash array to 5, you'll see that we get now dashes over here. And you can play with those numbers and adjust them to make this map look however you want. For now, I'm going to remove the dash array, and I'm going to leave the weight as 2, as that actually looks pretty good. So these are the various ways so far that you can style your map: at the country level, the map level, and then through the CSS file. If we were to remove the CSS file, just to show you what that does, you're gonna lose that zoom button over here. The map will take up more of the screen. You can see that it's now intruding upon other areas and it kind of covers it. Kind of a neat effect. It doesn't stay inside its viewport, really. And then if we put that back, you'll see why. And that's why we need the leaflet CSS, is to make it a little bit easier to manage our CSS and keep it on the screen properly. Next, we're going to talk about how we can add a pop-up to each country like we had in the demonstration at the beginning. In order to do this, we're going to hook into an event called onEachFeature. OnEachFeature is a property or event that gets fired whenever it's drawing a country on the screen. So over here on the GeoJSON object, there's going to be a property that we can add. As we know, our GeoJSON takes in our data, and then it uses that list of features or that array of features to draw all our countries on the screen. So over here on the GeoJSON, we can add onEachFeature like that. So onEachFeature is going to be equal to a function. We're going to call that function onEachCountry instead of onEachFeature, because the data that we're working with is actually a country. And that makes it a little bit easier to visualize. So up here above, onEachCountry is going to be equal to an arrow function. Now what this takes in is a feature and a layer. That feature, as I said, is our JavaScript object that represents the country. So I'm going to call it country. And then we'll just create our arrow function over here. So it's taking in a country and it's taking in a layer. And as you recall, we'll take a look at the structure of this object. So what's going to happen now is every single time it draws a country, it's going to print out the country object over here. And then we'll take a look at that on the console. So once again, to open your console, click on the three dots, go to More Tools, then go to Developer Tools. And here, we've printed out all these objects. So each one of these objects represent everything that's been drawn on the screen. So Australia over here will be an object somewhere over here. Now these objects have, as we talked about earlier, the GeoJSON. Each object has a geometry, which is how to draw it, and properties. And the properties have a country name and the ISO A3 three-letter character abbreviation for that country. So over here, we can come back, go to country, and as we see this structure, we have properties, and then property, and then we have admin to get the country name. So right over here, let's go dot properties, and then dot admin, save that. And now we'll be printing out the country names instead of that object. And then let's go ahead and take this code here, clean it up just for a second. And what we'll do, and we're going to keep our console.log there, we'll create a variable, and that will be equal to const country name is equal to country name admin, and then I can use the country name below over here. So we're going to get the same result. We've just refactored this code to make it look nicer. There we are. We're printing all the country names. Now, what I'm going to do with this country name is I'm going to display a pop-up. And this is going to be unbelievably easy. So the layer, what is that? Well, the layer represents the thing that gets drawn on the screen. It uses the country object, which contains the geometry, the array of points that represent this shape over here. Now the layer is going to represent the thing that's actually drawn on the screen. So we can say layer, what's been drawn on the screen, and then bind pop-up like that, and give it the country name. And then by giving it the country name, we're saying, okay, so create a pop-up and just take this text over here and display it. So then when our screen's refreshed over here, you can see now that when I click on these countries, we get all the country names. And it was that easy. It hides the previous pop-up and then displays a new pop-up. There are several functions and features that you can explore in the documentation, but out of the box, just passing in this single string like this, it'll hide the previous tooltip or pop-up and then display the new pop-up. So we could write anything inside there. Right now, I've just chosen to print the country name, but if we wanted to, we could say that maybe perhaps we have some other information that we want to display over here, like the population or something we could display. And then we could have another variable here that maybe contains that information, and maybe it comes from the country. You could say country.population and then display it and do something along those lines. So it doesn't have to just be the country name, but it could be some additional information as we have over here. So now when I'm clicking it, it just says China population 1,000. United States of America population 1,000. So these numbers are inaccurate, but just gives you an idea of what you eventually could do with this information over here. For now, we just have the country name. Let's explore adding a click event to the map. What I mean by that is every single time we click on a country, we want something to happen. In our situation, we're just going to try changing the color. So how do we do that? Well, once again, we have this layer. This layer represents the thing that's drawn on the screen. So by using that, we currently bound a pop-up. So we have a pop-up that displays for a layer and then displays some information. And for each country, that's the country name. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a click event over here. And how do we do that? Well, there is this property on layer called on. And on takes in an object. That object has properties itself, and we can provide it with different properties. So one of the properties I'm going to provide it with is a click event. The click event will be a function. More specifically, it's going to be an arrow function. That arrow function over here, so when we say layer.on.click, anytime I click on a country, it's going to execute this event over here. To prove that, we can just put a simple log over here, and we'll just put click. So now if I go click on that layer, which is our country, it'll print out the word click. So we'll go back to our map over here, click on a country, and then over here, you can see that it says click in our console. And then that number will continue to increase every time I click on a country. Not very useful. Nobody will ever see that because it's in the console or the developer tools. Only developers will see that if they have it open. But to do something more useful, we need to work with the event. So console.log, let's print out the event. The layer up here, so in order to access the layer, we can access that through the event. Let's go ahead and click on this country over here. Now, when this event over here, we're printing out the event object, console.log.event. That event has a target. And that target right there is what we can use to interact with the layer. And I'll show you how that can be done. So let's go back over here. And we're going to grab that event. And then we'll say event.target. .set style, and then set style. So we're basically interacting with the layer right now, and that style that we're going to set is an object. And let's start simple by adding a color, green, saving that, going back to our map. We'll go ahead and click on a country, and then we get a green outline because that color represents the border. But then we want to change the inside color. So we're going to add a fill color. And the fill color, we'll put yellow right there. Go back to our map, click on it. Now we have a green border and a yellow color. And there you go. We can click on items in our map and it affects only that layer that we're clicking on, because it's going event.target and then setting the style. And then we can also choose to fill the opacity if we want to. Right now, the opacity is set to 1, but if we wanted to, we could change it. Or we could make it lighter if we chose to. So we could say 0.1, come back over here, go ahead and click on a country, and you'll see that it's a lighter color. You can choose 5 or whatever and change those colors as you please. So there you are. We are changing colors and we have a click event firing. This is just one example, changing the colors or setting the styles, but you could do many other things when a click event is recorded. Let's go ahead and add a mouseover event. To start off, let's remove the fill opacity so we have that darker yellow color again. Then we'll go to our click over here and just rename it to mouseover. We go back to our map, and I'm going to close the developer tools here. If we pass our mouse over the different layers or the different countries, you'll see that it's going to change color now, just by our mouse moving over it instead of clicking. When we click, we still get the pop-up. But when we bind events using layer.on, we're not just restricted to one event. We can add as many as we like. For example, we could go ahead and also add a click event back. So we'll go click. Click is going to take in an arrow function that takes event. And we'll just close that and put a comma over there because after the comma is our next property, mouseover. Save it. And then on click, we'll say console.log and say clicked. So now we have two events. We have a click and a mouse over. If I come back over here and we scroll over these guys, you can see this is still changing color. If I go back and open my developer tools, we'll see that every time I click, it says clicked. See right there? Clicked. We have two events occurring right now. One with a mouse over where I change the color. And when I click, not only do I show the pop-up, but I print some text over here in the console. So showing you that we can have multiple events. Also, just a developer tip over here, an object like this can become really unmaintainable. So it would be actually much cleaner code if this code, like everything here to the right of click and everything to the right of mouse over, were functions that we placed within our code, so it'd be much easier to read. So for example, we might as well do that here. Let's go ahead and say on click, on country click. We could say on country click, take that entire function right there, put it right over there, save that, and then over here, say this dot on country click. And the same thing can be done with the mouse over, and always a good practice. I've made this change. I can see that everything is compiling. We could come back to our code over here and just double check that it works. And as you can see, whenever I click, we get the clicked down over here. So now that I know that's working, let's move to the mouse over, copy all that code right up until that semicolon, cut it out. I know that I'm going to call it this.on country mouse over, and then up above over here on country mouse over is going to be equal to what I just cut. Put that there, come back to our browser, let it refresh, and then try that out, and you can see that we've written a little bit cleaner code. This is much easier to read. Let's do a refactoring to our code. So click over here invokes the this on country click method. Instead of calling country click, I'm going to call it print message to console. And we'll take print message to console and we'll just put it over here. And then mouse over, we're invoking this.onCountry mouse over. I'm going to call this change country color. Oh, lowercase c at the beginning. Change country color. We'll save that. Go back to our map over here just to confirm that it still works. And as you can see, we can scroll over. And if you're just getting into software development as well, these are some good practices to, make sure your code executes, make sure everything's working as you do these changes. Now, the reason that we did this change is I want these methods over here to not really be bound to an on-click or a mouse over. I could use them for either. So for example, I'm going to get rid of mouseOver over here, delete the mouseOver event, and we don't have to say print message to console. We could instead use the change country color method over here. So now our code makes sense because when I click, I'm getting this event happening over here, but I can also change it back to print message to console if I wanted to. And it's not bound to either a mouse over or a click. Now, there may be reasons and times when you need to do that, but sometimes doing something like this, making the method names a little bit more generic so that I can use it for either a click or an on mouse over. Next, we're going to be exploring how to generate random country colors based on the opacity. Right now, all our countries are red with an opacity of 1. For us to achieve this, we're going to be using the on each country. On each country, we're going to go ahead and set that opacity using the layer. As you recall, the layer represents what is drawn on the screen. So naturally, we can take that layer, and you can put this anywhere inside this on each country method. We can take that layer, which has a property called options, and options gives us access to various options, as you would imagine. One of them being the opacity. And for example, if we go ahead and set that number and click save, we'll see that our red will now be a lighter shade of red, being a more like a pink or salmon on the screen here. We'll get rid of that console there as well. So we need to generate a random number. Now, as you recall, the opacity is between 0 and 1. That means all numbers between 0 and 1. That means decimal numbers, not just whole numbers. So 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 until we get to 1, and everything else in between those numbers. Which means we need to generate a random number. So how can we do that with JavaScript? Well, I'll show you over here inside our console using a little bit of JavaScript. And what I'm going to do down over here in the console, I'll clear the console out, increase the size. We have a function called Math.random. Math.random is a utility function built into JavaScript. And what it does is it generates a number between 0 and 1, which is a lot like our opacity number, which is a number between 0 and 1. So we can go back to here, go math.random, save it, come back here, we'll close that, and now you can see we have a map with randomly generated colors. Every time I click refresh, you can see that our screen changes and that each country has a different color associated with it. And that's all because we're using math.random to generate a random number for fill opacity. What if we don't want to use opacity, but we want to use different random colors? Well, I'll show you how we can do that. First, we'll make an array of colors in our code over here. So if we scroll up to the top of our page over here, underneath state, we'll go ahead and add color. Color equals, and we'll add a bunch of colors in an array. So this array will have green, blue, yellow, orange, and let's say gray. So there we are. We have a few colors over here in an array. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 colors. Now this array, what we want to do with it is use it to set the color of our layer. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to change what color our layer currently is. Right now, our layers are all set to the color red. So down over here, we're randomly setting the opacity, but we can remove the opacity by just commenting it out and say layer.options.fill color. we'll say fill color is equal to, and how do we access our array? Well, we use this dot color. So that's our array at the top of the screen, color. And what we need is a number between 0, because there's 5 items in the array. And arrays, if you recall, start with 0. So each item will go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So those are the numbers that we need. If I were to go ahead and put 0 over here, go back over here, you'll see that our entire map is green because the first item in the list is green. If I wanted our items to be orange, well, that would be 0, 1, 2, 3. Go back over here to our list. Say pick item 3 in our color list, set it as the fill color, and then we will have an orange map. We want this number to be random. One of those numbers between 0 and 4. To achieve that, we're going to use Math.random. And I'll show you how we do that. So over here, I'm going to open up the developer tools again. Go to developer tools, more tools, developer tools, clear it out. Okay, so earlier we worked with Math.random. Math.random will return us a number between 0 and 1. And which is every decimal place between 0 and 1. To achieve this, we can take this number, math.random, and go times 5. Now, every time we do this, we're getting a number that's between 0 and 5. To make this more accurate, what we can do, we can say math.floor round down. So floor rounds down. Now we get a whole number. See that? We're getting a whole number. We're just getting a decimal before. We're getting 3.2 and 1.7. Now we get a number that's rounded down. For example, if I took math.floor and I put in 1.7, that'll round down to 1. 1.4, round down to 1. If we want to round up, what you do is use math.ceil like that. Now 1.4 becomes 2. Otherwise, 1.4 becomes 1. We don't want to round up because we don't want to hitting the edge of our array. So our array has to be a number between 0 and 4. So if we get a 4.2 in our numbers when we're timesing by 5 or something like that, that's going to be incorrect. We need to round down always so that we're within the bounds of our array. Any number between 0 and 4. So taking what we just learned over here, we need a random number. Let's go ahead and generate that random number over here as a const. And we'll say color index is going to be equal to math.floor. So we're going to round down. Then math.random. So we're going to say math.random times the number of items in the list. So instead of hard coding that to 5, instead of hard coding that to 5, we can say color.length. And they'll give us the length, the number of items in the list, which will be 5. And then we can take that color index over here and use it over here, where the index number goes for the array. Spell that correctly. So all we've done over here is generate a number between 0 and 4. And then take that number between 0 and 4 and say, access one of the colors here. We're going to get one of these colors. And then what we're doing is on each country. So every time we draw a country onto the screen, we have access to the layer. And then we can say, hey, that thing that you just drew on the screen, go ahead and select one of these 5 colors to make it that color. Going back to our map, we get a map that looks like this. If I hit refresh, the map will change. There you go. Every time I click refresh, we're getting a different set of colors for our map. So this was blue, now it's gray, this is green, and now it's gray, yellow. So everything just keeps changing over and over. As a final step, we're going to allow the user to change the color of any country that they click on. Right now, when we click on countries, they become the color yellow. To allow for this, or to mimic the solution that we had at the beginning, I'm going to remove the code that we added for the random colors, well, the 5 random colors that we had. I'm going to put back the code that we had for the fill opacity for the different shades of red that we have. You can choose to continue with the other solution or mimic the solution that I have right now. If I save this code over here and refresh it over here, we'll see that our countries once again are the color reds in different shades. So let's go ahead and add an input box here at the bottom of the map. Going to our render method over here, below the map, add an input. And all we have to do is make it type equals color. Save that. When the page refreshes, we're going to have a color input here at the bottom. We can change the color of this input. As you can see, when I pick red, that input changes color. If I pick green, that input also changes. So what we'll do over here is we're going to be using a little bit of state. We haven't really used any yet. So color, we're going to set color equal to a value. When we ask this input for its color value, it'll come out as a hex value. A hex value, instead of writing the color yellow, it'll be represented by red, green, blue with a hex value. A hex value looks like this. It's a pound sign followed by groupings of numbers and letters. So for this example over here, we're going to be using FF00. And I'll save that. We won't see a change on the screen just yet. But down in our input, I'm going to set the value. I'm going to say value is equal to this.state.color. Then if we go back to our view over here, after it refreshes, you'll see that we now have the input as the color yellow. So let's go ahead and try and change that value. If I change the value to green, it's not working. It's always yellow because our state is always yellow. We haven't updated the state yet. We need to update the state for this value to change. So let's go ahead and update that state. So on input, we have an event called onChange, and on change, we'll do this .color change. We're going to add a function called color change. So just above the render method, or anywhere above render or below it, we can go add this method. We'll add color change. Color change will be equal to an arrow function, and that arrow function will take in an event. We'll use that event in order to get the input, get the value of that input, and set the state. So right over here, we'll call this .setState, and setState will take in an object that we're going to be setting, and we're going to be setting the color. As you recall, we can set only the properties that we want on the state, and our state only has one property called color. That color over here, we will set. So there we go, we have our event. We can say event.target.value. So that will get us the value, the hex value from the input. If we go back over here, make sure we saved. Now we can go select our input, and on change, when on change gets fired, the state gets updated. Because the state gets updated, this over here, value, will be set to whatever the current color is. And every time we change the color, it updates the state, therefore allowing the input value to change. As you can see over here, if I pick green, red, blue, whatever, it'll change the input. Now, clicking the countries, we haven't worked on that yet. We haven't changed those values. You can see it's still going yellow. It's kind of adhering to that opacity. We don't really want that opacity to change either. So let's go back into our code over here and do a few of the final changes that we need for this to work. Going into the change color over here, change country color, as you recall, we set up on our layer that there was a click event. And that click event would call change country color. Well, change country color over here is automatically setting the fill color to yellow. That's not the color we want to use. We want to use the color that comes from the state. So if we go this.state.color, and you notice before that the opacity was always whatever the opacity is here. So it would be a light yellow if it was that color. Let's say that we didn't want that and we wanted full opacity whenever we click something so it stood out more. Well, we could set that value to 1. Setting that value to 1 would not make it transparent anymore. So if we go back, click on this one, see this one's really light, it'll be a bright yellow, just like we expected. And now we can use our map to select different colors over here from the color picker. Change the colors of those countries. Just like we had in the intro, this example now has our pop-up, our different colors, we're setting opacity, and able to just create interesting little maps and functionality. I hope you enjoyed my video. Please like, subscribe, and share.